Well, welcome to the 2021 virtual VSSA program. Slavi Goleva is here. She's going to represent an advanced graduate student, and she's going to tell you about her journey to the PhD and a story of what it's like to be here. And you'll just be able to tell she's a delight. So I'm honored to have her here to present to you guys. Thank you, Slavi.
Thank you. That was such a sweet introduction. I do
Genuine.
appreciate the not saying the older. Hey everyone. Like Beth said, my name is Slavi Goleva, and let me load up this PowerPoint. Okay, so hey everyone, like I said, my name is Slavi Goleva. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm actually really excited. I was like excited putting this PowerPoint together and looking back through like my journey and just thinking about how I got here. So it's actually been really nice. I am a 5th-year PhD candidate, and I just added that I'm defending August 5th, so I'm like very excited and also stressed out if I'm being honest, but I think that's probably normal. But yeah, so that's coming up soon. I'm in Dr. Leah Davis's laboratory, and she is actually in the Vanderbilt Genetics Institute. I am in the Department of Molecular Physiology and Biophysics, but most people in our lab are in the human genetics program to do their PhDs. So I think I'm the only one that's in physiology, which has actually been pretty nice because I've gotten to like the physiology department, I would say is mostly wet labs, like a lot of diabetes researchers. We have the Vanderbilt Addiction Center that a lot of people tend to be in the molecular physiology program. So I feel like I've actually gotten exposure to a lot of different things. And then in the Genetics Institute, it's mostly like dry labs, coding, using genetic data. And so I have gotten a lot of experience doing that. I was super intimidated by that type of research when I did my first rotation, but coming into Vanderbilt, they always tell you like, you should just do it and you'll figure it out. And so I decided to just do it. And so they actually have a lot of good resources. Like I think we have 7 graduate students in my lab, and like not a single one has gone into the lab knowing how to code. So that's like my first advice is if that's something that interests you, like bioinformatics or coding, do not let a lack of experience stop you, because there are plenty of people that will help you through that. And so I currently study psychiatric genomics, and I am looking at the clinical and genetic epidemiology of functional seizures. And so I'll tell you like a little bit more about what that means later on in my presentation. But I just wanted to start with what my personal journey has been like getting to graduate school. So I grew up in Bulgaria, and I was like really hyped up putting these pictures together because I was like, oh, it's so pretty. But so I actually moved when I was 6 from Bulgaria because like my dad got a job in Kentucky, which was a big cultural shift, I think. They're very different. Bulgaria is in like Eastern Europe, and so it has that very Eastern Europe culture. It used to be a part of the USSR, and it's just very lovely. Like it's got mountains and beaches, and I think growing up there was really helpful because all of my family members are like kind of in STEM fields. Like my parents are programmers, my grandpa was an engineer, and so we've always kind of been pushed to do like mathy things from a very early age. And this was actually like culturally, they actually tend to do a lot of math. And it's been explained to me that like growing up in the USSR, because they didn't have many resources or like access to more like arts types of fields, they actually ended up putting a lot of emphasis on math type things because all you really need, like, you don't really need that many resources to learn that. And so that was part of, like, my dad got recruited to do a programming job in Kentucky where they recruited, I think, like 50 Bulgarians at the same time from like one of the universities there. So we had like a big community when we moved, which was nice because I didn't speak English at the time. And so, oh yeah, okay, I forgot I put this in here. Coming to America. That's also a really good movie if anyone has not seen that. But yeah, this is what the trip was like. It is cool seeing it this way because I didn't realize how far away it is. It is technically a 16-hour flight, but they're never direct, so it always takes like a day or so to get there. And I still probably go back like once a year or so just to visit family and whatnot. And I'm hoping I'll get to go now that this pandemic is like hopefully winding down a little bit. And so once I moved to Kentucky, really, I think my journey, like figuring out that I wanted to do STEM, actually started in high school. So this is like, I guess at this point, a really old picture. It's weird to think that like my high school 10-year reunion is coming up. But in high school, I went to the Math, Science, and Technology Center at Dunbar High School. And that was a really good experience. So we had like, you can see this group of around maybe 30 people, and our high school had like 2,000 people in it, but we took like more mathy classes. So we did have like advanced physics and biology and chemistry and some computer science exposure. And the big thing about this program was that they required us to do a 360-hour research project at a nearby university. So we all picked labs at the University of Kentucky and did a 360-hour research project, which I think was like a really good introduction to research and to like seeing the value and what it's actually like, and taking out some of that intimidation when I got to college. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I got to undergrad, but I knew that I did want to, I think I knew that I wanted to do something in STEM, and I really had liked my anatomy class. So I just was like, okay, I'll just go with biology. And I just ended up really liking it. So once I actually got in my biology program at the University of Kentucky, I don't know if I said that, but I went to the University of Kentucky, majored in biology. And I think like my second year there, this is Dr. Jeff Osborne. He was my professor my freshman year. And then I decided to do research in his lab my sophomore year. And so he did hypertension research, but it was really cool because he did hypertension research in primates. So they were called the vervet monkeys. And this was in St. Kitts, which is in the Caribbean. So I got to go there and like do research, which was a really awesome experience as an undergrad. And so I have a picture here on a day that we had out at the beaches, because we would usually like do work for 8 hours and then go to the beaches. So this was my graduate student mentor, Megan, who I still keep in touch with, and like she was amazing. And then Jeff, who was also amazing. And then this is one of the vervet monkeys. So they actually have essential hypertension, which is like really interesting because that means that they spontaneously develop it, which they're, I think, maybe the only primates like outside of humans. Like humans spontaneously will develop hypertension without any underlying cause, and vervets do too. So at the time, and they're actually an invasive species on the island. So the government was actually paying for us to like set up a research facility as a way to like keep the population under control. And so we made these like really big enclosements for them and kept them in group cages. And they seem to like enjoy it. They just hang out and like have their little hierarchies and whatever. And then we would basically like measure their blood pressure and like take other kind of descriptive characteristics and then take some kind of like biological samples that we could do molecular biology with and try to figure out whether there was anything that could be contributing to the vervet monkeys that developed hypertension versus the ones that didn't. So I was looking at a lot of like renal kidney markers at the time. And I got the opportunity to go to several conferences to present, which was really cool. So this is me in San Diego presenting this research. And then I worked there for about 3 years. And at the time, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I felt like the two options with a biology degree were med school and grad school, just because I don't know, I guess those were the two that I heard about the most. And so if I'm being like perfectly honest, I think the reason that I went to grad school was just because my mentor was like, you're really gonna like grad school. And I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. So I applied to graduate schools. Basically, his reasoning was that he was like, well, medical school is like a lot of memorization, which I think at this point feel like is kind of fair. I don't necessarily think that I would still perceive it that way, but I don't think I have any regrets. Coming into graduate school, I do agree that I do really enjoy, like, me personally, I really like having the opportunity to like be independent, to lead my own projects and like figure out what directions I want to go with. I love the flexibility of like the work hours and how you can kind of do like, you could kind of figure out what research you want to do at what times. Um, if you have, you know, personal engagements, that's always okay. If you want to take some time off of research and write because you don't really feel like doing research, you can do that. So I really do just like the flexibility of it and the independence. And I think when that was presented to me, I decided that graduate school seemed like a better fit at the time. So I decided to apply to graduate school my senior year. And this is it's kind of hard looking back at this point because it was like 5 years ago, but I tried to dig deep about like what it was, what my criteria were. And so one of my main things was location because I didn't want to be too far from family. So my parents still lived in Lexington, Kentucky, and I wanted to be able to go back easily if I could. When I was an undergraduate, I had like no money, so I didn't realize that I would have money for plane tickets and stuff when I got to graduate school. So I was really thinking like it should be within driving distance. And so this is kind of, it's also funny because I like put this map on here to show what's close to Lexington. And it's funny because I applied to schools that I thought were close. And in looking at this, I realized that like my opinions were actually not based in reality that much. But I did apply to the University of Chicago, Vanderbilt. So that was up here. Nashville was here, and then UNC, I feel like is here, maybe somewhere. It's in North Carolina for sure. um, but yeah, I didn't apply to any of these places, which now I was like, that's interesting because they were equidistant. And I did apply to like Wisconsin and Minneapolis and stuff too, which I'm now realizing is probably further. But I ended up only taking these 3 interviews in Northwestern, which is also in Chicago. And so I kind of narrowed it down to location. And like once I got my interviews, I narrowed it down even more, mainly because I just didn't want to be traveling that much all semester. And these were the 3 that I liked. And so some of the main things I liked about them at the time I was in physiology. So like I knew that at the time I really liked physiology and I wanted to go forward with that. But I also wasn't sure because I'm kind of just generally curious as a person and like I didn't feel super tied down to one particular discipline. So I really like the thing that drew me to those 3 schools was their interdisciplinary programs and how good they were. So Vanderbilt has this, and I think the other 3 had something similar where you can join one of like Beth, what is the exact number? Is it 10 programs?
11.
11. Thank you. So I really like that you can join one of like 11 programs. You get to do 4 rotations in any of them. Um, I like that the program that a PI is in doesn't necessarily have to be the program that you join. So I'm an example of that where I kind of like diverged. And I think it's helpful with training too, if you're like interested in learning about something that's not necessarily your lab's forte. So it's very important to me. Finding just opportunities that I found challenging. So what I liked about the interdisciplinary thing is that it gave me an opportunity to go outside of my comfort zone and to make sure that I did a couple of rotations that like I didn't really know that much about was important to me. And then also opportunities for growth. So I wanted to like something that I really enjoyed at Vanderbilt at the interview weekend was that they kept talking and like the people that I interviewed with would talk about how a lot of their students applied to like the NSF and NIH fellowships. And I think I recognized at the time that that's a really good practice just in general, like even if you don't end up going into academia, writing, applying for things, showing independence. And then also if you end up getting them, which Vanderbilt does have like a bit of a higher percentage of being successful with that, um, then I think maybe the averages around the country. I think it does look really good and it like opens up a lot of opportunities, which is nice. And so I know that I got the NSF fellowship and we have like a specific workshop each fall that Beth initially organized with another graduate student named Sierra. And so they've done a really good job of building it up. And so it's like 3 workshops that they like will walk you through exactly how to apply, exactly what you can do to maximize your chances of getting it. And I know that because I applied for it, or I tried to apply for it in undergrad. And so I know that's very unique. Like not all universities have that. And I do think it's really helpful. And we've been having a lot of people get them in recent years, which has been great to see. And then I also had a 2-body problem, which I think is funny that it's called a problem. But this is my partner, Doug, who is lovely. And we started dating in undergrad. So he was also a biology undergrad, but knew that he like didn't want to apply yet for things. So he was going to get a job as like a lab tech for a year while I was waiting and then apply to graduate school. And so one of my main things was that I wanted to go somewhere that like he would also have a good chance of applying and being able to get in somewhere for a year from then if need be. So this is a little bit about my time at Vanderbilt. It has been really lovely. So my lab is on the left and I've made a lot of like good lifelong friends, I think, in it, which has been really nice. Like I said, I've actually learned to code. And so I code in R and Python, which are these two. And I literally 0 experience going into this. And I do think that it's very valuable. So I think I've been in the lab since fall of 2018, which it should maybe like 3 years now. Yeah, like 3 years total. So in 3 years, I think I've gained a lot of really good qualifications for like future jobs. So I think I am really excited about having a job as a statistical geneticist, which basically means using genetic data. So things like 23andMe, where they will like, you send your sample to them and they tell you what your genetics are, but then they also use that for research. And so I use large genetic databases to basically determine what genetic variants are associated with various diseases or phenotypes. And so these are just a few of the places that I've applied to so far and gotten interviews at, which has been really cool. So I have a postdoc interview at the NIH next week. And I'm really excited about that. It's also like statistical genetics with the All of Us program, which should be really exciting. It's another like genetic biobank. And so I think that my time in graduate school has really actually solidified like my career choices for the future, which has been really, I think it's just been nice, and it makes me feel kind of more secure in what I want to do in the future. I don't think that a career in academia is necessarily for me. So I've been applying to industry jobs, but I also think a postdoc at the NIH would help me gain more experience, like maybe in machine learning, which I have no experience in currently. And maybe going from there, I have also considered maybe going like the government route, so being like a PI in government. So I think that would help me figure out if that's something I want to do. So that has been really nice. The bread office, which is the career office at Vanderbilt, has also been great because I got to do a data science internship through them. And so they have really nice opportunities that are not just academia. So for someone who doesn't want to stay in academia, that's been really rewarding. And then looks like I only maybe have about like 5 minutes left, but I'll tell you a little bit about a research story during that time. So my research focuses on the phenotype of functional seizures. And so this is a video clip of someone who's having a functional seizure. And you can see that it kind of looks like an epileptic seizure. So they're like tensing up a lot, and it kind of looks like a grand mal seizure. And one of the main features is that they're cognitively dissociated during this time. So when they come back, like when their seizure stops, they usually don't remember this. And so a little bit about like just an interesting story that I think about my research. So I was going to publish my first paper on this, and we were calling it Psychogenic Non-Epileptic Seizures at the time. And I had actually gone to a research seminar about epilepsy, or it was like a meeting about epilepsy. And so they were talking about how they had literally a whole seminar on like the nomenclature of this because the field has still not agreed on anything. So this is just a list of literally all the things that this one phenotype has been called through the years. And you can see that there's still like 7 different names that it goes by currently, which makes it really difficult to research. Because imagine like, let's say you're studying diabetes and people were calling it like 7 different things. So it's just very confusing, and it makes it hard to especially do research in electronic health records where you're like picking out data. So anyway, we were calling it psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. And then at this seminar, they actually mentioned that there was a lot of research about what these patients find offensive. So psychogenic seizures are, they kind of result from an excess of like psychological stress and trauma. So PTSD is one of the most common comorbidities. And for example, if someone is having like an episode of PTSD, their body can take that stress and convert it into seizure unconsciously and try to like get rid of the energy that way. But the name psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, a lot of the patients actually found to be offensive because it's implying that it's psychogenic. There's like a long-standing stigma with this disorder where doctors haven't believed patients, like they've thought that they're making it up, which they're not, absolutely not. And so it's very understandable why they would find that offensive. And I think I just like hadn't thought about that. And so it seems like functional seizures was more favored in 2 different studies. So they had like the greatest favoring score, and it was found to be offensive by the least percentage of people in a different study. So it really seemed like the best thing to use. And it also matches nomenclature for other functional disorders, which functional just means that there's no organic or underlying cause that we currently know of. And so we literally, like the day before we submitted the paper or like the reviews, we had to go back and like change all of the names and like write the journal and be like, we're sorry, but we want to change the name because of this and this. And looking back, I think it was actually really good, and I'm glad that we did it because it, like, ethically, I feel a lot better about it. But I do think it's just an interesting example of how things can take like a weird turn that you weren't expecting. And so I think I'm gonna skip this because I kind of went over this verbally a little bit. But yeah, traumatic life events that can trigger these do include like PTSD, abuse, and bereavement, and they do tend to have a very high amount of psychiatric comorbidities. And so this is another figure just showing the high prevalence of psychiatric comorbidities that tends to be in these patients. Um, and another reason that these patients tend to be stigmatized is that most of them are actually female. So we do know through research that a lot of times females are not believed about the disorders that they're experiencing by medical practitioners, especially historically. And so that's played into it. It does have a pretty low prevalence and a high heritability. And so basically, the limitations of functional seizure studies is that very few have been done. The ones that have been done have had very small sample sizes, and there's been a lack of epidemiological data and genetic studies. So our research objective was to leverage electronic health records that are linked to the hospital. So anytime anyone goes to the hospital, they have an electronic health record that's associated with that. And we can basically use that data to determine who has what disorders or phenotypes. And then when we get basically a group of cases, so let's use the example for like diabetes again. If we find a group of diabetes patients that are at the hospital, then we can use the rest of their records to see like what other disorders they have. And then we can use their genetic records to see whether there's any genetic variants that are associated with diabetes, for example, or in this case, functional seizures. And so I just want to briefly say how I went about finding these patients, because this is the data sources that we actually have in the EHR. So we have like clinical notes, demographics, lab data on all patients, and we can use that to find different phenotypes. And typically we'll use billing codes. So these are called ICD codes. And for example, like diabetes has an ICD code. And these are the other ones we typically use. And so here's an example. If we were looking for OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder, we would type in like obsessive and find all of these codes for obsessive compulsive disorder. And any patient who had this code in their chart, we just say that they're cases and everyone else is a control. And it makes comparison super easy. And just to give you an idea of the breadth of this system, there is literally like an entire book that is called Struck by Orca that is ICD-10 codes that are illustrated because they're so bizarre. So here is one. It is being like basically getting injured by an activity that is knitting or crocheting. So I really like this picture. It's just like someone who's gotten hurt knitting or crocheting. They also have one for the opera house as the place of occurrence of the external cause. So they literally have like, if this thing happened at the opera house, like we have you covered, like that's going to be in your record. And then the last one is a burn that's due to water skis that are on fire. And this is actually the subsequent encounter. So this is at least the second time that this person has encountered this specific issue. So it's just like very funny. It's very bizarre the way that they do this. But for psychogenic seizures or functional seizures, there's literally no ICD code. So that's how like stigmatized this disorder is, that like you can get an ICD code for water skis on fire, but not for functional seizures. And so I basically had to, once I figured that out, so like I thought it was going to be super easy, but then once I figured out that I couldn't just take cases and controls the easy way, we had to create basically an algorithm to detect these patients. So one thing is that epilepsy can often be like misdiagnosed. So we excluded anyone who had an epilepsy ICD code. We required the people to have more general ICD codes, like for seizures or conversion disorder. And then we also required the presence of a functional seizure keyword in the charts. So that was anything like functional seizures, pseudo seizures, like any of that long list of names I showed. And then we also required the presence of an electroencephalogram, which is currently the gold standard for how these patients get diagnosed. And so this is how I determine cases, but I think I genuinely spent like the better half of my first year in graduate school doing this, which for most things in our field is a pretty straightforward thing to do. And I think sometimes it was a little like discouraging that it was taking so long, but I think it ended up being a really cool method. And it's nice because now any other hospitals that have an associated EHR that do research can also apply this algorithm to find functional seizure cases. And so we ended up finding about 1,400 cases in our EHR that had been to the hospital. And it was like a 0.14 prevalence, which is a lot higher than we thought. And then the other thing we had to do was actually go back through like 50 of the charts to see how accurately we were finding these patients. So 80% of them had documented clinically established or probable functional seizures. And then an additional 18% had possible functional seizures. So all in all, our algorithm had like about a 98% success rate, which was really good. And so that was just a story of, I guess, something that took more effort than I thought it would, and something that was a little more challenging than I thought it would be, but that in the long run, I think ended up making my research a lot better and ended up making me a better scientist. So that was all I had to share with you all. And if anyone has questions or just wants to chat, I have free time, so I'm happy to do so.
All right, we'll open this up to questions. You can either unmute yourself or put it in chat. Well, while you're thinking, I have a question. Why this specific type of seizure for you? Was this kind of an ongoing project in the lab, or was this something that you were specifically interested in?
It was not ongoing in the lab, but it was like, so my PI, Leah Davis, had actually listened to an NPR story about this and like how stigmatized these patients are. And she had been like, oh my God, like that's crazy. Because they're like really understudied and like misunderstood patients. And so she had basically wondered if there was any way that we could find these patients in the EHR and like do a study on them with just like the large epidemiological data that we have. And so when I joined the lab, she was like, that was one of the projects that she basically pitched to me. And I thought it sounded really interesting. So just decided to pick that up and kind of rolled with it.
That's fascinating. I love that interplay of, it's basic science. You're looking at fundamental, like trying to uncover fundamental biology, but this is super patient driven. That's really important.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, Slavi, thank you so much for coming. We just so appreciate you. And
yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed putting the presentation together and getting the opportunity to talk about myself for 30 minutes.
Check out our website to find recordings of all of our videos. We'll get them posted about a week after each of the presentations. We can't wait to see you.